um, Tom, that was my grandfather, Uncle Ernie.
Okay, and
But
grandfather
Uncle, that's on Harry Panacci's side. There's a lot I can tell about that too, but I will be here for days.
Well, just start a little bit on
Okay.
that.
Okay,
Okay.
so I'll return right now to telling about my grandfather, Harry, and my mom's dad. And he was, his mother was Grandma Simonetti. And Grandma Simonetti, as long as I ever knew her, was crippled and in bed. And I found out later from her, I don't know what relative this would be to me, but we used to think we were cousins, Susan Teresa Spatafor. And she lived with her mother, Beverly and Sam Spatafor, with and taking care of Grandma Simonetti. And Grandma Simonetti was my grandfather's mother. And I was told later by Susan that Grandma Simonetti had Parkinson's. But I do remember her laying in bed, not being able to turn her head left or right, and her hand was sort of cupped like this, and she shook. Her whole body shook like that. And it was very sad, and as a little girl, it was sort of scary to me.
Yeah.
But Sundays, my mom and dad, we would go to visit Grandma Simonetti and Beverly and Sam, you know, every so often, not every Sunday. But every Sunday we would go to Rose Hill Cemetery to visit the graves of where my great-grandparents and other people were, or my grandparents were buried, and where Dad and I will be buried. And I think that when I think of that, it was sort of a thing that we all expected Sunday after church. We got in a car and drove to the cemetery, and especially after my eldest brother, George Getcho, was killed in an automobile accident. Now, George, Roy, and Bob are all my stepbrothers, but my parents never called them stepbrothers. They were all my brothers. And they added another dimension to our family, and one that I always enjoyed. And George, I don't really remember because he was killed in an automobile accident when he was 20. And my understanding is that he was driving to Duke University to enroll. And my dad got a call in the middle of the night saying that there had been an accident and the young man in the car had been killed, which was a terrible, terrible shock to my father and my mother and everybody, I'm sure, that knew George. Everybody liked him, and he still holds, I believe, although maybe they've been beaten by now, the track records down at Kentucky Military Institute. And he was very good at track. And I don't know, did he do anything else in track? He, as far as, it was just running, I think. Dad knows some of the stories too, so.
It was mostly track and field that he participated.
Yeah.
And he did have state records in Kentucky for holding the 100-yard dash, and Florida, because KMI had winter headquarters in Sarasota, Florida.
Yes.
And so they would go move the whole campus from Kentucky to Florida for the winter time.
Wow.
And so he participated in state records both in Florida and Kentucky. And for a graduation from Kentucky, KMI, at the graduation, your parents presented him with a Ford automobile convertible.
We have this all on movies,
And they,
which is fun to see, actually.
and it was a big deal because many of the students knew this was coming, and it was sort of a special event. And so it was almost a parade of, it seemed like couple of hundred KMI graduates that were celebrating the gift of this car.
Wow.
And then, of course, on his way to Duke University, after spending the summer in Appleton, in September-ish, it was 1938, that he was in this two-lane highway in Indiana driving to Duke and passed a car on a hill, and which we know we're not supposed to do, but he did it, and hit a car oncomingly, and many people were killed.
It was in August 11th,
Oh, wow.
because I remember that date
Yeah.
being sort of a sad time
Oh.
every year.
Yeah.
You know, remembering George. And yet the movies that we have of him getting the car and of us being down at Kentucky Military are good. And I'm only about so high. I think
Oh.
I'm 4 or 5 years old.
Mm.
I think I must have been 4. I looked pretty small. And but going down to Sarasota was also fun. We stayed down there. And it was like every winter visiting the boys at the summer or the winter campus in Sarasota of Kentucky
Was
Military.
it Silver Springs or Sarasota?
Well, we went to Sarasota, so I don't,
Okay.
it might have been Silver Springs, but I think it was Sarasota town. Or Venice, is Venice?
Oh,
in-
yeah, right near there.
Venice is where it was.
Mhm.
We might have stayed in Sarasota and school was in Venice, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, yeah.
But the boys were always fun, and they always, they'd call me sis sometimes too. And we all were close. Lee and I always called them our brothers. We never would say
Yeah.
they're our stepbrothers. And we were very proud of, I was always proud I was the only girl. And I thought, I have 4 older brothers, so there better not be anyone to tangle with me. They'll
Right.
be protective.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think actually they would be a half-brother,
yeah.
not a step,
That's right.
because you have
Yeah.
the same father.
That's
Right.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And you started saying how it was just a matter of course that you, on Sunday afternoons, would go to the cemetery. That was just sort of a
Yes.
part of the times in those days. That's what your family.
Yeah.
That was a given.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
do remember my dad, whenever there was a ball game on, I'd have to listen to the ball game on the way there, on the way home, and it was so boring to me. I thought, oh, I wish I didn't have to listen to this. But it got to be just sort of a natural thing. Then he was enjoying himself.
Yeah.
But on Sunday night, we'd come home and have dinner, and then we'd go and lay on the floor in the living room. My mom and dad had a big radio that they got for a wedding anniversary, or a wedding gift. And we would turn on The Shadow and all
Oh,
the
yeah.
old not movies, just
Radio programs.
radio programs
Yeah.
that we had on. And we'd listen to all of those in the squeaky door of Inner Sanctum. And we'd all lay there and go, ooh, it's so scary. And we'd have all the lights out.
Oh.
That was basically Lee and myself and my mom and my dad. And it was always fun to do and listen to the programs that were on the radio at night. And let me think, something else. We always went to church on Sunday.
Mm.
It was basically Preston. I should say Arvell and Preston were a couple that worked for my mom and dad. They were from Tulsa, Oklahoma. They were a Negro couple or black couple or whatever people are presently saying for black-skinned people, African American. They were just lovely people, and I adored them, and Lee adored them, and they were like a mom and dad to us when we were, mom and dad went to Florida in the winter, and Lee and I were home up to high school. At high school, we had to stay home, but we went to Florida all winter.
Oh.
And we went to Blue Ocean Villa, which was a wonderful place on Biscayne Bay. And Arvell and Preston stayed home and took care of 122, and they'd have their friends in from Evanston and wherever they had friends from. And they'd play cards in the breakfast room and do whatever they wanted to do. And we really enjoyed having them, and probably my mother more than anybody, but they got to be, when I was in high school and couldn't go to Florida anymore because we couldn't leave high school, like telling us what time to get in and what we could do, and this is dinner, and giving us our orders for the day. And I said, Lee and I both enjoyed them, but I do remember Preston driving us Sunday morning, Lee and me, to Sunday school. And they would cut down off of Green Bay Road on this one side street, I don't know what street that is, in Wilmette. And they'd go by and they'd hit each other like that, and they'd do it again, and I was like, what are you guys doing? They said, oh, we can't tell. And they had like a boys club, and then they'd point. And then Preston would sing Blueberry Hill. I left my love on Blueberry Hill. And then Preston later said to me, it's just a boys thing, we have a hideout there. And I don't think they had a hideout, they were just trying to be secretive.
Oh.
And so then we went to church, Sunday school, and later Mom came and she went to church, and Dad wasn't going to church with us. He had been raised Catholic, and he I don't know whether he'd left the church on his own. I think he did, because he was divorced from Beulah. Beulah had been a actress of some sort, written up in the papers and everything, when they got a divorce between Beulah and my dad. And it seemed like everybody in town knew about my dad's divorce from Beulah. Not that I knew it at the time,
Yeah.
but years later, as I got into high school and started dating Dad, his mother knew about it. And his mother also asked me if I was really Italian. And I'd say, yes, my grandfather's Italian, because I'm thinking Harry Panacci. And she said, no, I don't think you're Italian. And she must have known more than I knew.
Oh.
And I didn't know about that. So Grammy filled me in, but I never believed her at the time, so she never knew.
Huh.
But anyway, Arvell and Preston, back to them, they were working in our house, and they'd come in at night to serve us dinner. So we lived a very lovely life as far as having help in the house.
Mhm.
But we were always taught not to think we're any better than anybody else. And all of our friends basically didn't have help in the house, around the clock.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, they lived in the back room.
They lived in the back room that was a very nice room.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, and they basically stayed in their room all the time until dinner time, and Preston would make these wonderful rolls for Sunday dinner, and we'd eat around 3 every Sunday after we'd get back, I think, from before we had to listen to the I want to say movies, the radio programs.
Yeah.
What the rolls that he made were like these, they weren't biscuits, they were really like Parker House rolls or something that were very good. And Dad tasted one time when we were dating, and he was trying to figure out a way to get invited to dinner because he liked Preston's rolls.
I sure did. One other thing about Preston and Arvella, they started working when the house was built in 1936, and they started working there as a couple, and actually lived in the house even before your mother and dad moved in at the completion of the home.
Huh.
And they had it all ready for them, almost like a greeting when they arrived.
That's right.
And they worked there for approximately 18 to 20 years, in which they saved enough money that they then moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and started their own business.
Wow.
And their own business was a restaurant. And years later, when I was in the service in Fort Smith, Arkansas, Grace we were married, first year of marriage, and I was in charge of hardship discharges. And a friend of mine, Hal Doder, was a pilot and had a pilot's license, of course. And so the three of us flew to Tulsa.
From
and-
Fort Smith, Arkansas.
in a small little 4-passenger airplane,
Oh, gosh.
and arrived with Arvella and Preston picking us up at the airport and taking us to their home and having several of their friends greeting us.
Oh.
And it was just a wonderful party. We were there for maybe 4, 5, 6 hours. And then we got in the plane and flew back home again.
That's
Back home to
wonderful.
Fort Smith. It was a lovely time. I felt close to the Prestons also, because when I first started dating Grace in 1948, they were very active, and as Grace said, were actually subbing as parents when the actual parents left for long trips to Florida and thereabouts. And so they were sort of watching me doubly,
Yeah.
dating Grace,
They did.
and I got to know them and loved them very much myself. And so that started in '48, and they actually had left around 1952 to start their business. And then we were married in 1954.
And Arvella came back for the wedding.
She did come back for the
Oh.
wedding to help with all the work that was involved. And a very large wedding that was done at St. John's Lutheran Church. And then the reception was at 122 Woodstock, in which we had, I'm gonna just guess now, maybe 300 to 400 people at the wedding.
Wow.
So it was, and it encompassed the whole backyard with tables all
Yeah.
over it, and which was a large backyard.
Yeah.
So it was a wonderful situation.
It's remarkable that Nana and Baba would entrust them with such a responsibility of two
Yes.
teenagers in high school.
Yes.
That's remarkable. How did they know Arvella and Preston when they hired them?
I just think they hired them, but I don't know.
I know.
Do you?
Yeah.
Tell us.
Your father answered an ad in the paper, or
Okay.
possibly it was the other way around. Arvella and Preston, Humphrey, answered an ad in the paper looking for a cook and a chauffeur or butler combined relationship. So they applied for the job. They were relatively newly married, and they were accepted immediately, and that was their position.
So over time, I mean, you were very little when that happened.
Yes, I was
She
only,
was 3 years old.
and Arvella scared me because I had never seen black people before.
Oh, right.
And my mother said she was going to the store, and I said, "Can I come too?" And she said, "No, honey, you stay here with Arvella." And I went, "No, no." And so I remember hiding behind a chair like you're sitting in, Jenny, a wing chair, and thinking, I've got to hide so she doesn't find me. And I sat there, and she'd come in and say, "Let's see where Grace Lorraine is."
Oh,
She always called me Grace Lorraine.
Oh.
Arvella was a very proud black lady. Her maiden name was Peacock, and she came from Oklahoma, and she was extremely proud of her parents and her sisters and the whole family. And also, she was a very determined woman. She would not take no for an answer. If she wanted you to do something and you weren't complying, her hands were on her hips, and she was looking at you sternly, and you pretty well did what she told you to do.
Oh my gosh, that's great. That's great. You want to pause for a second?